Okay, everyone. By my computer's clock, at least that's 2 minutes past one, so we will get underway. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fourth webinar on the Test and Learn Systems-Wide Evaluation Programme, which the Centre for Homelessness Impact will be running on behalf of the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities over the next 3 years. This webinar is going to focus on individual placement and support project, and we'll paste the links to the 3 remaining webinars in the chat as we move along through our slides today. And they'll also end up on our website in case you missed them or want to rewatch them. So my name is Graham Gardner, and I'm the Head of Programmes at the Centre, responsible for delivering this project alongside our many partners and the team at the Centre. We're not going to do a full round of introductions, so I'm just going to quickly introduce the team working on this project, who you'll have the opportunities to hear more from soon. So starting with Ella Whelan, who is our programme lead on this project and will be the key point of contact going forward. From our evidence and data team, we're joined by Nadia Ayed, our evidence lead, who will be working with the evaluators on this Test and Learn project. And we're also delighted to be joined by Gary from IPS Grow, who will be supporting us and organisations delivering the IPS model. And we'll talk more about his involvement along with Niles and IPS Grows going forward. And not to forget Kit Kalis, who's online and helping us with all the tech today, and we'll be posting important information as we go along. Okay, so just very quickly, a bit of housekeeping or virtual housekeeping. We are recording the whole session today to put this webinar on the website in the days ahead, probably next week. There's a question and answer function that you'll see in Zoom, and we'll collate your questions to ask our panel at the end of the presentation. And we'll also use these to populate an FAQ, which will be held on our website. You've got a bit yesterday's webinar on personalised budgets, where I think we had about 30 questions, I think it was in total. And so we got a lot of information out there. So please keep asking questions in the Q&A. I will have to finish the day at 2 o'clock though. So generally we've taken about 20 minutes to go through our slides, and then the rest of the time could be in a Q&A. But I know a few of us are nipping off to another meeting after this, as I'm sure many of you are too. So who are we and why are we here? As many of you know, the Centre was founded with the mission to act as a catalyst for evidence-led change, enable people working in and around homelessness to achieve breakthrough results. Our goal as an organisation is to ensure that the policies and projects to tackle homelessness are as effective as possible, and that we gather as much evidence as we can on what works, and then use that evidence to improve outcomes and create impact. And that's why we were delighted when DLUHC announced as part of their Ending Rough Sleeping for Good strategy in 2022 that they were going to invest £15 million to improve the evidence base and understanding of what works to end rough sleeping. This ambitious commitment gives us the chance to increase the amount of evidence we have about what works and make the case for the future investment in these types of services. Or if you're already running a type of service that we're going to study, then make the case for continuing that. Following a competitive process in the autumn of last year, CHI were awarded the contract to deliver on that commitment on behalf of DLUHC, and that's why we're all here today. So in this webinar, we're going to talk to you about running one of the 8 exciting Test and Learn projects. This one's on IPS, Individual Placement Support, all of which will be formally and robustly evaluated to improve the evidence we have of what works to end homelessness and rough sleeping. We also have plans to undertake a systems-wide evaluation focused on homelessness and rough sleeping, which looks at those wider factors that drive the homelessness and what works well or indeed less well within the current system. So if you want to find out more about that one, please head on to our website, and there's more information on the webinar we held on Monday. So moving on to Test and Learn programme, these are some of the key principles and reasons why it's so important. So just to say, these 8 projects were chosen from a list of over 100 that we and the wider sector, so folks like yourselves, thought it was important to test. Each one will be evaluated to see if the outcomes for people in receipt of the support improve, and also how it was implemented and whether it's value for money. Most of that £50 million that I was mentioning earlier on will be spent on the projects, delivering services to people experiencing or at risk of rough sleeping and homelessness. And as I was saying earlier, we know that some of these projects already exist in England, which is why they've been designed to support people like yourselves, make the case for these successful interventions continuing or bringing the new interventions to your areas. Now, I did mention, I think at the start, that this is a 3-year programme, so I just wanted to show an overview of where we're at today. So since about October, we've been busy in the background, trying to refine all the interventions and build our grant making process that Alice is going to talk us through later on. This is our launch phase, where we're now publicly talking about it and encouraging organisations, local authorities in England to bid to be part of the projects. And then in the future, once we've finished with delivery, we'll then focus on initial reporting and final reporting and dissemination. So again, amplifying what works to the wider sector within the UK. So this is the overview of the 8 projects, and there are other webinars and there's lots of information on our website about them, but today's focus will be on individual placement and support. So I'm going to hand over to Ella, Nadia and Gary to talk you through this in detail.
Thanks, Graham. So this slide shows a kind of a quick overview of some of the key things that you probably need to know. So we'll be asking for bids from interested parties to deliver this exciting new service, as well as bids to evaluate this service. And we're looking for third sector partners as well as local authorities to work with us at the centre with IPS Grow and the appointed evaluator. And this evaluator will be conducting an RCT evaluation, which Nadia is going to tell you a little bit more about later. The quick key dates are the 10th of April, when the applications will be open on FlexiGrant, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And then we're expecting our setup phase to kind of last July till November approximately, with delivery sort of beginning in November and running until June 2026. And that kind of length of time is to ensure that everybody gets access to the full service. Great. And then, so these are some of the key features of this IPS project. And it's focused on people sleeping rough or experiencing homelessness. You'll be working closely with Gary and his team at IPS Grow to deliver the service. So the IPS model holds 0 exclusions. So that means if someone wants to work, they should be offered the opportunity to work with an employment specialist towards employment. And these employment specialists will be integrated into existing homelessness teams and offer an intensive support, which flips that more traditional train then place model on its head. So we're looking for about 3 organisations working with 6 to 8 local authorities to deliver this service. And there's around 400k available per organisation to support the delivery. We're expecting approximately 75 people to be supported per organisation, but all of those numbers are kind of approximate depending on the kind of applications we get. And I'm going to pass on now to Gary to tell you more about their wonderful work.
Thanks, Ella. Hello, everyone. I'm Gary. I work with Social Finance, and we've won the contract to deliver IPS Grow. And IPS Grow and our partners support the scale of IPS across England. Today, I'm going to kind of remind us all what IPS is and talk a little bit about how we can support IPS Grow and our partners can support this trial, randomized control trial. So I guess most of us know this, everyone probably knows this, but IPS, of course, is the most sort of research supported employment approach in the world. It's different to traditional sort of vocational rehab or employability program approaches in that it's grounded in 8 principles. And, you know, some of those principles turn the traditional way of supporting people into work on their head, really. In IPS, we say everyone has the potential to do real paid work with the right support. So as Ella said, there's no exclusion. We don't wait for people to get ready and, prepared. We work with people straight away as soon as they say they're interested. We start looking for work as soon as possible and, undertake a whole range of employer engagement to do that. And that's different to traditional models where a lot of time gets spent on, preparing for jobs and looking for jobs, and no in-work support with the employer, whereas IPS focuses on in-work support with the employer for both the individual and the employer. IPS is all about paid work, and that's the focus from the beginning. And other models often, get caught up in looking at all sorts of options, and usually the outcome is somebody starts a training course or does voluntary work. So IPS really is about paid work, and we help people into work. And as Ella said, the really important part of IPS is that it's a shared care approach. So the employment specialist focused on supporting the client into work is working with the treatment team or the support team, and together they're all, focused on the broader kind of outcome of recovery and supporting people into longer life-term goals, etc. Compared to sort of regular employability programs where often the employment specialist is all alone. Can I have the next slide, please? So just reminding you all, you know, I said the big grand statement, it's the most researched supported employment approach in the world. There's 28 randomized control trials around the world on IPS and a whole range of meta-analysis, which consistently show, you know, the evidence on IPS. It's recommended in the NICE guidelines as the leading model to help people with serious mental illness. And also, Jane Carroll Black's paper suggested it was the best approach to support people with a drug and alcohol history, misuse history. So when we look at the evidence of all those randomized control trials and meta-analysis, IPS comes up consistently as helping, you know, twice the number of people into work. In fact, the rates are incredible. It's like 55% average compared to 25%. All the randomized control trials are currently, you know, focused on people with severe mental illness. IPS helps people have better health, I guess, but it's really the employment, the vehicle of employment is helping people, you know, have other things to focus on, meaning, connection. And so, you know, what we find is that people, if they do become unwell, they're unwell for shorter times and their hospital stays are shorter. And IPS, you know, helps people into more sustainable work, longer term work. People work for longer, they earn more. You know, it's this kind of amazing evidence-based approach. It is now a core part of the NHS long-term plan to support people with serious mental illness. So that's a fact. And the aim is to really increase access to IPS in that area to support up to 100,000 people in the next sort of 5 years. Next slide, please. So as I said, IPS, individual placement and support, most research form of supported employment. Of interest, it's driven by this 25-item fidelity scale. So it's like a driving manual. And, you know, because IPS, I always think of IPS as two kind of really great things. One, three, it's always focused on the client. Two, it's always focused on shared care. And three, it's always focused on research and improvement. So because of the research over the years, IPS started with a 15-item driving manual, and now it's moved to 25 items. And under each item, which is like a delivery item, it explains what you really have to hit to be able to deliver on IPS. And the good news is we have a fidelity scale and a fidelity manual, 400-page manual, and we're able to actually guide and support staff in delivering IPS and ensure a consistency of delivery across regions, countries, continents, whatever. So of interest, the fidelity scale is 25 items. It's broken up into 3 main areas: staffing, organization and structure, and the way services are delivered. And a service can rate themselves, or they can have an independent review, and they understand, you know, how they're performing in line with fidelity, in line with good practice. And it's never, you know, the results are never that the service is a bad service or a good service. It's just how closely aligned are they to the best practice for delivery. A fidelity review offers us insights into strengths and challenges for delivery. And one thing we've noticed in picking IPS up into different contexts, from SMI, from serious mental illness, it takes a while for IPS to kind of get embedded into new systems. It's just a fact of, you know, it's a change tool. It's helping people have a different lens and a different focus in terms of how to support individuals. Next slide, please. So just a quick recap on the IPS movement. It was created in America or the USA back in the early 1900s, and specifically for people with serious mental illness. From the 2000s, expanded into a whole range of other countries, and lots of randomized control trials and studies occurred to confirm its effectiveness. IPS is now delivered in 25 countries in Europe, including us, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, Hong Kong, Japan, and of course the USA, where it started. And in England, IPS has now expanded beyond supporting people with serious mental illness into other sorts of cohorts, and it's very much business as usual to support people with a drug and alcohol misuse history, or people with a mild to moderate health condition. Of interest for you, IPS has been applied into supporting a whole range of different new cohorts, so people with post-traumatic stress disorder, spinal injuries, learning disabilities, neurodiversity, etc. Next slide. So I just wanted to remind you about IPS Grow and our partnership, and then fold that into how we're going to support this randomized control trial. So as I said, Social Finance won the contract to deliver IPS Grow. We work very closely with our partner, the Centre for Mental Health, and together we provide support for quality scale of IPS across England. And as I've mentioned, in 3 main areas: IPS in the NHS for people with serious mental illness, IPS in all drug and alcohol treatment teams across the country, and that's funded by the Department of Health and Social Care, and then IPS in primary care in 12 major sites initially, and that's funded by DWP. So we're helping IPS scale up in those areas, and we want to bring all our experience and skill to this trial to support you, the people who win the opportunity to make this happen, to support you in your practice. Next slide. So what will IPS Grow and our partners support with this randomized control trial? 3 kind of key streams: implementation support, workforce development, and quality assurance and data management. So with implementation support, our key training partner, Centre for Mental Health, will provide some very much upfront training and development for staff coming into the trial. This includes, fundamentals about IPS, employer engagement, and then IPS Grow, our staff will provide hands-on mobilization support as teams get up and going, helping people unlock and work out, what's some barriers and what's some things that need to get in place. We'll also create a knowledge management section on the NHS collaborative platform, so staff on this trial in real time can go and access resources, have discussion groups, etc. And then finally, we'll create various networking events. So we call them COPs, Community of Practice. And so we'll ideally create specific communities of practice for this trial with the group who are undertaking this trial, but also people can fold into our national existing COPs for all of IPS across England. And we find that cross-fertilization is brilliant. So that's a really useful part of people becoming efficient, effective in delivering IPS. In terms of specific, then next stage workforce development, lots of focus on team leader coaching. What we find is the team leader role is critical for making this happen. So if they're all kind of understanding and confident with practice, they're able to support their team in delivery. A lot of focus, though, also on the employment specialists. That's ES for employment specialists, especially around another acronym, EE, which is employer engagement. So a critical part about IPS is our staff, employment specialists, getting out and finding jobs that match with the client desire, the client preferences, etc. And some people find that really scary, even though we try and recruit for the role. So a lot of focus on EE and employee engagement. And our partner Centre for Mental Health will organise some in-the-field training on that. Finally, we have some e-learning courses that everyone can avail themselves to, and they include things like case management, how do you maintain momentum, just general fundamentals, introduction to IPS, and there's some training for clinical staff, treatment staff, support staff that we could push forward as well. Finally, a really critical part then obviously will be managing data. So we will be able to give people access to our data tool and help people set up with that so that you can gather in real time and understand what's going on with service delivery. Also, we'll be able to conduct the fidelity review. So we'll be able to come in and independently have a look at how well people are translating IPS into this context and what's the strengths and what's the challenges. And then the most important thing about a fidelity review, which is like a little kind of review on how you using the manual, how you're making it happen. The most important thing is talking and discussing and exploring what's going well, but what else needs to improve, and then developing action plans. So we'll support with that. And then we'll be there to help with people realize their action plans. Next slide. So just a final slide from me before I hand back to Ella. What we're asking of you is to come in, if you're interested, come in, and you need to be agile. You want to be open to test and learn. This is going into the grey in a way. We don't know, how IPS is going to work in this area. We kind of need to all be curious and pioneering. We believe it can work. There's lots of evidence that it has made a difference, but we want to test this in the England context. Something we were hoping to create as well was a collaboration amongst all the providers. So if we have 2 or 3 providers, everyone thinking of themselves as a team, we're working together to make this work. And our commitment is to trial protocol, you know, it's a randomized control trial. There's an element of unfairness or sadness that, you know, in the moment, some people are going to not get the intervention that some will. However, the bigger picture is we're trying to build the evidence base for, you know, future funding and support for this whole area. So thank you very much. I'll hand back to Ella.
Thank you so much, Gary. So to recap a little bit.
Ella, I don't know if it's just me, your sound seems to have dropped out.
Yeah, Ella, sorry, we have a sound issue at the moment. Yeah, Ella, sorry, can you turn your mic on off again and see whether that good old IT trick works?
Can you hear me now? It's like, why is everyone trying to talk at the same time as me? I'm being so interesting and fascinating and delivering important information. Right, I'll start again. Although you've all had time to read the slide now. Anyway, thanks, Gary. That was great. So to reinforce, IPS will be implemented with support from Gary and his team. And so if you were to deliver this model, you'd be working together collaboratively to kind of set it up and to deliver this service. And Gary would be supporting you to make sure that you stay true to the model. So those kind of fidelity reviews that Gary was talking about. And as noted, we're looking for partners who are kind of ready to set up IPS within their existing homelessness service. And we're expecting that service to be set up and then to recruit the employment specialists to support people experiencing homelessness into employment. And you would, of course, have the support of the centre and of Gary and his team while you're doing that. And this work will involve, as Gary mentioned, working with local employers to find suitable posts. So you're looking at that kind of that EE engagement. And we'll also expect you to engage and support IFF, who are a research organisation who will be doing the data collection for this project. And just to briefly mention again, there will be a competitive process to apply with bids made through that Flexi Grant portal that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about. And then I think if we go on to the next slide. Yeah. So a little bit more about what delivery would look like and what we're kind of looking for from you. So if you're already delivering IPS to people experiencing homelessness, then unfortunately, this isn't the project for you. And we're really keen that you make sure that you have enough people in your area to kind of meet the requirements of the intervention and the evaluation. So we're expecting each partner to set up, to generate those referrals and deliver the service. So it's really important to consider before you put your application in, can your service do this? And you've also got to be ready to share any data and support that data collection and consent procedures. And we would also recommend ensuring that you have the full buy-in from your kind of senior executives or senior team in your organization, as they'll play a big part in the success of the project. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to start putting them in the Q&A box, or you can get in touch with us afterwards as well. I'm going to hand over to Nadia now to talk us through the evaluation.
Great, thanks, Ella. So as Ella mentioned, I'll just run you through what the evaluation will look like for this IPS trial. So the trial will comprise of three main components in regards to the evaluation. So we have the impact evaluation, the process and the implementation evaluation, and the economic evaluation. Just to give you a bit of an overview in terms of what that means, many of you will know that already. But ultimately, with the impact evaluation, we'll be achieving that through a randomized control trial, and specifically a 2-arm multi-site randomized control trial with randomization happening at the individual level. So what that means, to sort of dispel that jargon, essentially people will be expressing an interest in IPS, and then 50% of those people who participate in that in the trial will receive IPS, whereas 50% will receive, standard care or business as usual, as we tend to call it in randomized control trials. And ultimately, what the RCT will allow us to do is establish whether IPS is effective at supporting people experiencing homelessness in terms of getting them into employment. The key here is understanding whether people receiving IPS have better outcomes to what would have happened had they not received IPS. So comparing that to business as usual. The implementation and process evaluation, which is not a super catchy term, so I'll refer to it as an IPE, essentially helps us to understand why something works, or if we find that it doesn't work, why that's also the case. It also helps us to understand what the trial looks like when it's been implemented in reality. And as Gary mentioned, you know, IPS is really well established in other areas, but it's not extensively, or at least not through an RCT, been trialled with people experiencing homelessness in the UK. So we really need to pick what it looks like when it's implemented. It can help us better understand who it works for, potential reasons why it seems to work or doesn't work, and this all helps to guide future delivery. And then the third component of the evaluation is a financial evaluation, which will help us to understand and quantify the different costs and benefits of the project, and also to understand who bears those costs and those benefits. And ultimately, the aim here is to support a future investment case if we find that IPS is indeed effective at supporting people experiencing homelessness. This is likely to be done through a cost-benefit analysis, given how quantifiable sort of employment outcomes are, but the details of this are yet to be sort of finalised, because we've not got an evaluation partner lined up just yet. So ultimately, those three components help us to be in a strong position to comprehensively and confidently understand whether IPS is effective, which is very exciting. In terms of the delivery partners, and what you'd sort of be expected in regards to this trial to do, is regularly sharing data on the support that people receive. So that's sort of employment data, number of referrals, housing outcomes. And this may require signing a data sharing agreement. Also identifying participants and staff to take part in interviews and focus groups. So that feeds into the implementation and process evaluation in particular, which, as I mentioned, will help us understand what it looks like in practice. Sharing financial data, which obviously feeds into the economic evaluation, and then, as Ella and Gary have mentioned, working closely with IPS Grow to conduct those fidelity reviews, so that we can understand how we can sort of adapt IPS, which has come from quite a different context, to work with people experiencing homelessness. So I think that's everything from my side in terms of evaluation. So I'll hand over to you, Ella.
Thanks so much, Nadia. I'm hoping that everybody can hear me. Thanks for the nods, team. Appreciate it. So this is just a whistle-stop tour of our grant-making process here, so you kind of know what we're working with. As I said earlier, the applications will be open from the 10th of April, and you'll have around a month to submit your bid. And that will be assessed by myself and colleagues at IPS Grow, and our Grants and Evaluation Committee will have final sign-off on any decision. And I can show you a little bit about how you'll make your application now. If we could go to the next slide, please. Oh, it's not the one I was expecting. That's what I was expecting. Thank you. So Flexi Grant, the time has finally come. So we're determined to make this as simple as we can. So this is the kind of page that you'd see when you follow the link that we'll give you to apply. So you'll just have to register to give your details, but we promise no spam. And then once you've registered, it'll tell you that you've been successful in registering, which is really helpful. And then you'll see this when you've logged in. So that's just a little spiel letting you know about the Test and Learn program. And then you can see that little blue button there. You can start an application from there if you wish. There's also another button, if we go to the next slide. Thank you. That says start. So you can start a new application from there, and you'll be able to see sort of similar application openings, which will be labelled per project. So it'll be quite obvious which one you should be looking for. But obviously, if you have any questions, then do reach out. And when you go into the application form, we've made a few key documents available to you that I'd like to highlight. So firstly is that subcontract agreement that you'll be asked to sign, as well as the head agreement between CHI and DLUC, which sets out some of those terms that we have to follow. And then the information policy is also there, as that's referred to in the contract. And finally, you'll also have access to the service specification, in particular for this project, which contains all the kind of key details of the project, including kind of like how many referrals we're looking for and how we anticipate that the service will kind of be set up and run. Thanks. So you'll have instructions and guidance kind of throughout the Flexi Grant process, but it's all pretty straightforward, I think. So I'm sure you'll be fine. And then there are these kind of 6 sections where we'll be kind of asking for your details and asking you to answer a kind of few questions about why you would like to deliver this service and how you might anticipate delivering the service, but hopefully nothing too taxing. And then you'll have submitted your application, hooray, and you'll receive a confirmation that looks like this. So we can go to the next slide, thanks. So just a quick recap. We'll be asking for bids from interested parties to deliver this exciting new IPS service, as well as bids to evaluate the new service. And we're looking for third sector partners and local authorities to work with us at the centre, with Gary and his team and the appointed evaluator for this project. And the key dates are the 10th of April, when the applications will open on Flexi Grant, and we're expecting that setup phase to last from July till November approximately, with delivery beginning in November and running until June 2026. And I think it's over to you now, Graham.
Thank you, Ella and team. So as the slideshow says, any questions? I'm going to take it down. So we don't need that up anymore, but I've seen some questions coming in through the chat. So I'll try, if I can, pull a few of them together and then direct them towards our panelists. I'll answer the first one though, which is, are the slides can be shared? Yes, they'll be up on our website in probably next week. By the time that Kit has done his magic with this webinar, he'll attach the slideshow to that, and homelessnessimpact.org, and then you go and select projects, test and learn. You'll see an individual page for each of the projects there. So I'm going to start with Gary maybe. Is there a particular age for the cohort to be supported? What are the age elements around IPS model?
Generally speaking, IPS 25, so IPS supported employment focuses on adults, so whatever that kind of is defined. Usually it's from 18 years plus. Some countries it's 21, 24 years plus. So that would, I'd be saying, yeah, we're focused on adults at this stage. But Nadia, is there a...
Just to echo, it would be 18. The way we've been thinking about it is anyone over 18, but there's no upper age limit.
Thank you. Nadia, one for yourself. The sample size is quite small. Is there scope for recruiting more organisations to the control arm to increase power? And for people like myself, could you talk about how it increases power, maybe?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. In terms of increasing power, I'm not 100% sure in terms of what numbers we would need in the control arm to get the power to where it needs to be. But just to reassure people that the sample size was calculated based on an assumed MDES, an assumed sort of attrition rate. And so attrition meaning that because it will be a sort of follow-up trial, there will be 18 months after people start the intervention, we'll collect data to understand whether IPS has sort of sustained outcomes. But we're assuming that a certain percentage of those people will drop out. Just, over time, people, lose contact details, maybe don't want to participate. So we have sort of calculated the sample size based on those assumptions and also based on the budget requirements that we have. I don't know if there's a huge amount of scope of increasing the power. I can speak to Guillermo about that, but I imagine that the sample size is pretty set. But again, I do recognise that 460 people is relatively small as big trials go. But hopefully this will be sort of an indicative trial, and then, if it is successful, we can definitely scale that up again at a later stage.
Thank you, Nadia. So a couple for yourself. I'm going to try and theme them if I can. So are you looking for early third sector partnerships? Is this funding available to NHS trusts? Do you maybe want to tackle those two?
Yeah, sure. So absolutely, we welcome partnership bids. We definitely want people to be talking with their local authorities and with kind of neighbouring or sister charity partners, perhaps. Yeah, definitely looking for that kind of collaborative approach. And the other question on NHS trusts, I'm not 100% sure, but I don't kind of see any reason why not at the moment, off the top of my head. Graham is nodding, so it must be fine. Yes, we welcome applications.
Yeah, no, we're happy to get applications from across the sector. It's very much around that delivery element and recruitment to the model and getting the right number of people that we require for the evaluation that Nadia was mentioning. So there's a question about that, Ella, again. I think it says, I think you maybe mentioned 60 to 70 participants. Please, could you confirm the number of participants required per organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So kind of it's slightly dependent on how many organizations we end up with, and that will become clear through that grant making process that I outlined just a little minute ago. But approximately, we're looking for around 75 people to be supported per organization. Again, that's an approximate number, but if that helps with submitting your application, that's what we're looking for.
One for yourself, Gary, again, or maybe two I'll put together. So would individuals with limited English be eligible for this support? And there's a question here that says chaotic drug, so people who use drugs and have chaotic behaviors, I'll maybe rephrase that, can be difficult to engage. How would you go about motivating them for work? So what was your experience there from other trials?
Sure. So the point of IPS is that you're discussing and offering supported employment to everyone. People at all different conversation levels in the support team are talking about employment. If somebody takes up that offer, we just work with them. And what we find is people, a lot of people move forward and get into work. Some people realize it's not for them, and so they don't finish through with the IPS support, and that's fine. But the idea is that we don't make any sort of assumptions about someone's willingness. Some of my best examples of outcomes with clients are people who everyone had written off basically, and they usually then become somebody that becomes a bit of an inspiration for other people. So we'd use them as a case study with their approval. So you can never assume anything. The idea is we offer, you interested in work, we've got a service that can support you. If someone says yes, we work with them.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary. Okay, so there's probably another question here around the people element of it. So when you say existing homelessness services to integrate into, do you mean a local authority homelessness team, Ella? Or could it be another kind of homelessness service, e.g. local housing first service? I'm seeing nods on the screen, so do you want to maybe tackle that one, Ella?
Yeah, sure. Always helpful to see confirming nods from my colleagues to make sure I'm getting the answer right. Yeah, so we're looking for an existing homelessness service. So that can be in a local authority, that could be a housing first homelessness team. It's just that team already exists, rather than setting up a new homelessness service as well as a new IPS to support people who are experiencing homelessness service, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then just to follow up about that delivery element as well. So is the 400k budget for the 2 years of delivery is a question?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, that will cover the whole delivery period for the organisation. Yeah.
Yeah, and so when we open the bids through FlexiGrant, there'll be a full specification that kind of suggests, so there'll be a total amount available, and then it'll be for each organisation to place a bid. And I think we would suggest that you can consider how many referrals you can make and align that appropriately. Gary, you were mentioning earlier on around, I guess, the DWP and Department for Health being involved in IPS trials, and there's a question aligned to that, which is there was a suggestion that we made earlier on that if you already have IPS, so homeless people, it won't be for you. But there's a question, but won't all areas be delivering IPS to people experiencing homelessness through the inbound universal support? And will those delivery windows co-align? Are you aware of that? Or
I mean, there is plans for the current IPS in 12 large primary care areas around the country to morph into universal support. I guess what we're saying though is if you're delivering IPS now into, for people who are experiencing homelessness, that may knock you out of this opportunity. And once we get going, that's, that will be the challenge. There's IPS in all sorts of systems. So, we'll just have to make sure local Job Centre Plus and the other IPS teams know what's happening with this trial, etc. Nadia, would you add to that, or?
Yeah, because I mean, just to add in terms of the real issue there is that if we're offering IPS, but the business as usual is IPS, that means that the RCT is not, really tenable. So I think there's definitely nuance. If IPS is being offered in primary care and drugs and alcohol services, there's a likelihood that maybe there's a bit of an overlap in terms of the people who are supported. But if you're sort of in that grey area, I'd still encourage you to apply, and then we can have a discussion around whether we think that a lot of the sample that we're interested for this trial would be eaten up by standard IPS care that's offered through a different strand locally. So that's sort of the way that I'm thinking about it from an evaluation perspective. Because also to be clear that the exclusion criteria on an individual level for this trial would be if someone is currently receiving IPS of any form. So that's kind of where that's coming from.
Thank you, Nadia. Ella, a couple of questions for yourself around eligibility. So can you expand on the eligibility providers? Are suppliers also able to apply for the grant as long as they do not deliver an IPS service in that specific area for which they plan to integrate IPS as part of the trial? A recap of the timelines, if possible, and cohort eligibility. Sorry, that's 3 questions in one. I'm testing you on a Friday afternoon, I know. Is it that they are currently rough sleeping or experience of this, or is it homeless? So it's about being in different forms of accommodation. There's a challenge.
5 questions now, Graham, to be quite honest with you. So I'll do my best. So we can recap the timeline super quickly to start us off. So the applications will be open on the 10th of April. And then that setup phase, we're expecting July to November 2024, with delivery beginning, again, these are kind of approximate timelines, but delivery beginning November 2024, lasting till June 2026. And then there were some questions about eligibility. I think so. Expecting that we'll have partners who have existing homelessness teams and aren't already delivering IPS to people experiencing homelessness or rough sleeping. So that's the kind of key distinction there. Preferably, they wouldn't be delivering IPS sort of generally in the area, just because of the potential for overlap. However, we'll welcome applications from interested people, and we can kind of go from there. And if you have any questions about it, then obviously do feel free to reach out or watch the webinar back again for such joyousness. And there was one more part of your question, maybe 2 more parts of the question, Graham, if you don't mind.
So there's other questions that come in around this. So there's one very much around the accommodation that people will be in. So, for example, do they have to currently be experiencing rough sleeping, or can they now be in accommodation, temporary accommodation, or even support accommodation? So it's the type of accommodation people are in.
So they don't have to be currently rough sleeping. They can have experience of rough sleeping if they're in temporary or supported accommodation. Absolutely eligible for the IPS support that we're expecting to be delivering.
And I don't know whether Gary, you've experienced this in the past, but there's been a couple of questions about individuals in supported accommodation, and I think we're all aware that quite often there are service charges attached to that, as well as the rent, that makes it is sometimes seen as a barrier to employment because of the impact on benefits. Is that something you've come across in other trials, or you could maybe share some thoughts on how we think that might go in this trial?
Yes, no, it definitely is. It comes down to this. A big part of IPS is having some local level relationships with DWP, the Job Centre Plus, and trying to get access to things like, the discretionary housing benefits and things like that to support people who are transitioning from, supported housing into work and need some time, obviously, to make that transition. So we do experience that. We do recommend just forging those local links and trying to access some of that local funds that they're responsible for.
And then while you're speaking, Gary, there's a question. Does the funding, or maybe a bit for Al as well, does the funding that organisations would win include consideration for covering the cost of staff training, or is that something that IPS Grow will be providing?
So we've in terms of looking at a total package, We've scoped out the sort of training we would want new teams to gain. So we've got funds so that the Centre for Mental Health can run some specific upfront training, and then we've got funds so that we can run in the field training and support from the Centre for Mental Health. And then there's funds for IPS Grow to offer all the technical advice and guidance, do the fidelity review. So that's part of the wraparound package, because we want to make this, you know, as successful as possible.
Okay. One for you, Nadia. What are the key outcomes you're interested in for the impact evaluation?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So the primary outcome for the impact evaluation is employment. I believe, I know there's a few people in the room who have done RCTs on IPS before, but I think the sort of the threshold it's set up is set at is 7 hours of employment a week for 13 weeks in a 16-week period. We're quite keen to use a threshold that matches previous research so that we can compare its effectiveness. So we've got employment as the primary outcome, but then as the sort of secondary outcome is housing, because ultimately what we're doing with extending IPS to homelessness is looking at a very specific cohort, and you know, homelessness being the issue that it is, housing is totally essential in understanding if IPS actually improves housing outcomes. That also helps us put a case for the scalability of scaling up of IPS specifically for this cohort. There will then be a sort of host of other psychosocial outcomes around mental health or well-being, that's sort of open for the evaluator to sort of guide as they see fit, and also keeping in mind the potential cost-benefit analysis, and also to supplement the primary employment outcome with things around like what the nature of the employment is, the pay, how many hours a week, those sort of more vocational variables. There was a question in there as well that related to that, but I don't know if we'll come to it later, but I can't find it now. There's so many questions.
Yeah, there are a lot. Apologies if we are trying to get around them all. So, Ella, perhaps, in addition to supporting individuals with employment, due to the cohort having an experience of homelessness, is sustainable accommodation included? And as a similar question, does the funding support with access to sustainable accommodation, e.g. deposits?
So the funding isn't for accommodation specifically, but the funding is to employ those employment specialists that will offer a kind of a quite holistic support to the people in receiving the support from the employment specialists. So there is kind of like a bit of a package around the individual, and with the hope that if they are able to get into work through the IPS support with the employment specialists, that they'll be able to kind of move forward into more stable accommodation.
Thank you, Ella. All right, I'll give you a wee break. Will the slides be shared? Someone's asked. Yes, they will. They'll be up on our website likely next week alongside this webinar, so you can come back and enjoy it. There's also quite a wider test and learn question that I'll try to answer. So do the potential cohorts need to be separate, as in would it not be acceptable to have the personalised budget and the IPS in the same area with potentially the same cohort? So I'll start and then I'll pass over to Nadia, who can probably do that. So just say broadly, when organisations are putting in bids, we will have to assess them. Once they're assessed as like how good is the bid, if that makes sense, we'll then assess it against the evaluation criteria before we make our recommendations to the Grants and Evaluation Committee of CHI. So we are going to have some awareness if, for example, two interventions are very close to each other and an organisation has applied to deliver both of them. Broadly, just think about those cohorts of people that the project's designed to address. So we know we have one that's about data to prevent homelessness. So that's about very much people preventing homelessness. So we know that's quite a separate cohort. And to, for example, a couple of projects focusing on rough sleeping. So I don't know if Nadia wants to kind of, I guess, share her thoughts from an evaluation perspective to answer that question as well.
Yeah, I think it's maybe an unhelpful answer, but the answer is probably it depends. As you've mentioned, Graham, like we are looking for a geographical spread, and also if there are several projects going on in the same area from an evaluation perspective, that raises the risk around recruitment. If for whatever reason, either the referral routes or the trial sites are struggling due to like local pressures or local demands, I think it can potentially make it riskier. And then from an impact evaluation perspective, it may just muddy the waters a little bit if all of a sudden, you know, say 3 projects are in X area, it's sort of the business as usual becomes quite enhanced. I think you could argue. So I would say if you're in that kind of situation, still worth putting in a bid and being clear about how you would mitigate that. But it definitely would complicate the picture, but I don't think it would sort of constitute an absolute no under any circumstance.
Thank you. Someone's asked, can you point us to 28 RCTs? I believe that someone very helpful is just Jen, has put that in the chat with the link to the IPS Works website. So thank you very much, Jan, sorry. But we'll also see if we can embed that link with the slides when we put them out. There's one detailed question about RCTs, which I'm not going to ask, mostly because I will have difficulty reading it, but we'll try to take it through the FAQs that we'll be publishing on our website as well, because we do appreciate people who are both interested in delivery and the evaluation aspects of this. And it's getting a bit complicated for me to say, being a bit more on the delivery side. So I'll move on to a couple of the other questions. Ella, are there any specific locations, geographies that are preferred for the trial, e.g. high population areas?
It's a good question. I think kind of similar to the answer about delivering multiple projects in one place. We're looking for a kind of geographical spread. You know, your urban, metropolitan, coastal, rural, etc. So anything goes as far as location goes.
Okay. And Nadia, do the outcomes, does that include sustainable housing? Is that an outcome we're measuring through the project?
Yeah, so the secondary outcome will be around housing, and that is, in terms of sustainable housing, I think we're using the residential timeline, I think is what we're hoping to use across the test and learn projects. So that's sort of quite a holistic measure that captures the type of accommodation that people are in and sort of how they're able to sustain it. So yeah, the short answer is yes.
Absolutely. Okay, one last question I think it is then. So do people experiencing homelessness include supported housing residents? I'm seeing 1, 2, 3 nods. So what we're like, and for a bingo, we'll say full house. Yes, it does. Thank you for the question. And generally we've had this across a few of the projects. We are using kind of broad terms when we're talking around people experiencing homelessness, rough sleeping, and that type of temporary accommodation. We don't want to be exclusive of people, I should say. We obviously want to include people at risk of homelessness or experiencing homelessness and rough sleeping in the trials. That's why we're here. That's why the centre's here. But we're trying to use broad terms and not the technical definitions that we might use as a former local authority employee. Once you go down the statutory routes, you start including, excluding people. So that is 5-2. And I think apart from the RCT one, which we will come back to on, we have answered all the questions. So it just remains for me to thank you very much for taking the time out of your Friday afternoons for joining us. I hope you have learned something. I hope you're interested in placing a bid for the individualised placement and support employment model. I think it's something we're very excited about. Even if you choose not to bid, we will be communicating as the centre throughout the delivery of this programme about how we're finding it going. The interim report and obviously that final report. This is about increasing the amount of evidence that we have in the sector, that our colleagues at DLUC who are commissioning this, as well as local authority and other commissioners have, so we can make the best decisions about how we spend money to prevent, alleviate homelessness. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.